Hello, I'm Wayne Visser and I'm Director of CSR International, and I'm here in Chicago today with Woody Clark, who's an author and Managing Director of Clark Strategic Partners. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm aware that you are doing a lot of work in developing countries on advising on climate change and issues like that. Can you give us an idea of what is some of the interesting and innovative practices you're seeing?
Well, I think it depends on what part of the world that you're in terms of what developing countries are doing. I was just in Africa, East and West Africa, and it was actually quite an eye-opener because I was very amazed at the concerns that both East and West Africa have about this issue and about the impact of climate change. And also, they are receiving the brunt of the whole thing. They are actually getting impacted. Climate change is a global issue. It's one that I've been involved with for a number of years, for 20 plus years now. And what I can say is that there are solutions to this, which I've been trying to get people to see in the developing world. And I think the greatest example actually is China, where I'll be later this fall. But the point is that the issue will be for developing nations to leapfrog into the future, not to follow the Western lead. The West has been through what I and others refer to now as the second industrial revolution, which is primarily of fossil fuels. I also think of it as mechanical engineering because now we see more renewable energy, we see much more electrical and chemical engineering in terms of science and technology. But those technologies are now being essentially used in developing countries. China is the prime example, but there are also good examples that I saw in Burkina Faso in West Africa, where they have actually a telecom system where mobile phones are now being used with transmitter systems rather than landlines or whatever. It's all wireless. You can go to a grocery store or a shop or cafe and you have a wireless system that's available for free. Mm-hmm. And many people are carrying mobile phones. Mm-hmm. Same sort of situation in Mauritius, which is in East Africa. It's an island nation, and the same kind of thing and the same kind of concerns. Learning from the West is one thing, but not to duplicate. This third industrial revolution has to do with renewable energy, smart green communities that are sustainable, being very much aware of what kind of technologies and programs need to be implemented. So we can take examples from the West in one way or the other, but not to duplicate what's going on. Yeah. So a good example would be that the third industrial revolution has started in Europe. It's certainly in Northern Europe, the Nordic countries, also in Germany and Holland and other parts of Europe. But it's also been going on for a couple of decades too in Japan and also in South Korea. There are excellent examples of that, including the kinds of vehicles that are being developed, all electric or hybrid, but also in terms of mass transit, high-speed rail and other things, much of which we don't have in the United States, and that's one of the problems. We are still stuck in the second industrial revolution, in large parts because certain industries, oil and gas industry and also transportation, has kept us from moving ahead, from really going into a third industrial revolution. So in a sense, we need a wake-up call, and that's one reason I'm doing this book on the third industrial revolution, which will be out sometime early next year in 2011. But in the meanwhile, we'll look to China, and China's got some great examples of what they're doing, and they're already there and making plans to go ahead. And that's two things I'll mention. One is they have 5-year plans, and they put money behind those 5-year plans. That's helpful for business and planning. And the second thing is they also apparently want to start having a carbon tax. That's important because now we're going to pay the true price for oil and gas.
Yeah. And can we talk a little bit about speed and scale? Because we've had many pilot projects around for a lot of time. And are you seeing any countries or any companies that are really being ambitious, that are saying 100% renewable energy or technologies that are growing extremely fast that will get us to that leapfrogging?
Well, I see a lot of companies that are talking this way. I see a lot of countries that are talking this way. And I see a lot of communities that are talking about they are becoming sustainable, or if you will, green communities. I have questions about that. It's one reason I refer to myself as a qualitative economist. Because what I'm really interested in is if people are doing these things, let's see it. Let's see examples of it. And then let's see what the pattern's going to be. And also putting their money where their mouth is. Public relations, press, elections, that's all one thing. But where's the action? And so the issue comes down to where I've seen some of these things happen. One is very dramatically in Denmark. I used to be a visiting professor there during the 1990s, and I've seen it then and seen it more recently. Another place is in Holland. It's amazing what the people have been doing in Holland over the last couple of decades. Then, of course, if you look at South Korea and you look at Japan, Japan is an amazing model of where all of this has been going, and it's been for a long time. A company called Toto, which makes plumbing devices and bathroom fixtures and all. I mean, we never think of the bathroom as being a modern kind of sustainable area, but when it comes to water and waste, it's critical. And in most of our parts of the world, we don't really understand how that works. But Toto has made it a corporate purpose and sustainability for well over 3 decades. And they've been very successful at it, and I give them a lot of credit for that. By the way, I own no shares in these kind of companies at all. I'm just saying this is what my observations have been.
Yeah. Now, many people on the climate change issue are kind of waiting for the global deal. Do you think that that's an appropriate strategy, or are we seeing business actually going ahead of political settlement?
I had, as you know, co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize because of my work with the UN IPCC. And I've been involved with these kinds of discussions on the global, if you will, approach. I think they're good at one level, but they're really ineffective and not substantial in other ways, and particularly given the measurements on whether or not it's really happened. Part of the problem is compromise. For example, if we keep compromising in the United States, we're paying the real cost for oil and gas by allowing companies to still get tax incentives and discounts and actually incentives to drill wells offshore again, that's a disaster, and that's really a major problem. What we've got to do in America is pay the actual price for fossil fuel, I mean not for fossil fuel, but for energy. And to do that means no longer having those kinds of incentives that the government has given those companies. The same is true in other areas as well. It has to do with buildings, it has to do with communities, and it has to do with transportation. All of it's part of making our communities sustainable. And the fact is, we need to ask those questions of our corporations. If people are shareholders, they need to raise those kinds of questions and issues. And more importantly, our government's got to make decisions that the solution to all this is not a cap and trade program. The solution to this is actually charging the price of fossil fuels that they should be. And then we're going to see some solutions globally.
And the innovation that we see is coming from some surprising sources, like Google, for example. Can you give some examples of where you've seen really interesting things happening that may take us to the transformation?
Well, Google's a great case. It's actually highlighted in my book on sustainable communities as a whole chapter. And it's not unexpected, to be honest with you, because Google has been a company founded by a couple of young, very creative entrepreneurs. It's been very successful in many ways, and in fact it's even more so than anybody ever anticipated. But what's interesting about it is they've also not just spoken about these issues of sustainability, but they've done it for their whole corporation, where they've got the whole corporate headquarters covered by solar panels, and then also have electric cars and vehicles that can plug in and recharge themselves there. Now that amount of energy doesn't solve their whole problem at Google, so Google has also started to use fuel cells, and that way they can generate power and also control and store power for later, like at nighttime when the sun's not out. It'd be great to see Google to have wind turbines on some of its buildings or right around the complex as well. In urban areas, that'd be fantastic. And why not put them in near Palo Alto and Silicon Valley in the Bay, where there's a lot of area that can't be used really for swimming or other activities other than boating. If you have wind turbines there, you've got a lot of wind, that'd be fantastic. So it's the beginning of that whole process. And we do see a lot of innovation in the United States coming from Silicon Valley, which is where Google is headquartered.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights today, and
Yeah.
all the best.
That's great. Thank you.